Areas located near forests, grasslands, or semi-wild regions are often heavily affected when a natural environment changes over time. As living spaces shrink due to the expansion of farmland and residential areas, the natural food sources of wolves also gradually decrease. This forces them to expand their range in search of new food sources. At first, wolves only appeared deep in the forest or in areas far from farms. However, over time, they gradually moved closer to fences, livestock enclosures, and open fields near residential areas. The increasing frequency of sightings caused many people to pay attention and worry about the potential impact on local livestock operations. First, wolves usually appeared alone at night or before dawn. After some time, their numbers began increasing around residential areas and farms near the forest. They moved quickly along fences, trails, or poorly lit areas before rapidly disappearing from sight. At certain times, several wolves appeared together before separating and moving in different directions. The distance between wolf activity areas and residential zones became increasingly narrow, making local residents more concerned. Repeated appearances showed that the wolf pack had begun to treat this area as part of its familiar movement route.
This video outside.
La gallina no es mía. Vale. Ya chingón, está bien.
As sightings became more frequent, control measures began to be implemented. Hunters carefully observed the areas wolves often pass through in order to identify the main movement routes before setting traps. Trap systems were placed in various locations, such as trails, along fences, and even open fields where wolves frequently crossed. During deployment, bait was also prepared in advance to increase attraction. At the same time, bows and arrows were carried to support hunting when necessary. Hunters selected suitable hiding positions to monitor the entire area without disturbing the surrounding environment.
First, it's pretty good there. And just lean this in there. That's something like that.
After the entire system was fully arranged, the hunters began waiting for the wolves to return along their familiar movement routes. Throughout this process, noise was kept to a minimum in order to avoid affecting their natural behavior. As night fell, some wolves started approaching the baited area before stopping to observe the surroundings and then continuing forward. They moved through both narrow paths along fences and wide open fields within their regular activity range. From hidden positions, the entire process was carefully monitored while waiting for the most suitable moment. As they moved closer, the wolves began entering the exact area that had been calculated in advance during the trap setup. The scent of the bait caused them to stop and investigate before stepping deeper into the activation zone. As soon as enough pressure was applied, the trap mechanism activated almost instantly and held the animal within the control area. The entire process happened very quickly, giving the wolves little time to react or change direction. After the trap worked successfully, the hunters confirmed that the chosen location matched the wolves' actual movement routes and familiar travel patterns.
Holy, eh?
Like a furred up dog. He's eating some dirt. Only thing I've seen on this.
Wolves usually do not move randomly, but instead follow familiar routes such as trails, dense forest edges, or areas with natural cover. However, while searching for food, they can still cross wide open fields if they sense signs of food nearby. Their strong observation skills and quick adaptability allow wolves to change direction flexibly depending on environmental conditions. Once they discover a favorable area, they often return repeatedly, following the same habits. This characteristic makes wolf behavior possible to monitor and predict after a period of observation. Controlling wolves is a process that requires significant time and patience. When their behavior is clearly understood and control measures are deployed in the correct locations, effectiveness gradually improves. This helps reduce risks to livestock and residential areas over the long term.
Everything began very quietly. One morning, the farm owner noticed that the number of poultry had slightly decreased compared to previous days. There were no clear signs of disturbance, no loud noises during the night, just small losses repeating over time. Along the fence, a few footprints appeared, forming a thin and consistent line. At first, these details were easy to overlook because they were not very obvious, but as they continued to repeat over many consecutive nights, attention began to increase. What once seemed minor gradually revealed a problem that was forming and repeating in a pattern. As this situation continued, closer observation showed that the appearance of the coyote was no longer random. The traces repeated in the same locations and at similar times, usually during the quietest hours of the night. Cameras recorded images of a coyote moving quickly, low to the ground, and almost silently before disappearing into the darkness. The cause of this appearance came from changes in its natural habitat. When natural food sources decline, They move closer to human areas to take advantage of easily accessible food such as poultry, small animals, or leftovers. Once a stable source is found, they return repeatedly based on established habits. To control effectively, the first step is to identify the movement routes of the coyote. They do not move randomly but usually follow familiar paths such as forest edges, fences, or unnoticed trails. These routes help them stay hidden and move safely in human environments. When a path is used repeatedly, it becomes a stable habit that is difficult to change. If this pattern is not recognized, placing traps will not bring the desired results. Careful observation of repeated signs helps identify the exact areas that require intervention. Once the movement route is identified, trap placement begins in a calculated manner. The trap must be placed directly along the coyote's path, rather than in open or easily noticeable areas. The position should be discreet and aligned with their natural direction of movement. If the trap is placed incorrectly, the chance of contact is very low and can easily be ignored. Maintaining the surrounding environment unchanged is also important, as coyotes can detect even small changes in familiar spaces. Accuracy in trap placement plays a decisive role in control effectiveness. After the trap is placed in the correct position, bait is used to increase attraction. Familiar bait such as meat or naturally scented food often produces better results. The scent spreads through the quiet night air, stimulating the coyote's curiosity and natural hunting instincts. After setting the trap, the area must be left unchanged to avoid raising suspicion. Waiting is a crucial step, as coyotes tend to return based on habit and will not approach immediately if they detect anything unusual. After some time, the coyote returns along the same route it has used before. It moves cautiously, often stopping to observe and check its surroundings before getting closer. The scent of the bait draws its attention and keeps it in the area longer than usual. The combination of habitual movement and attraction leads it into the exact position that has been prepared. When all elements are set correctly, the trap begins to work as expected. This is the result of careful observation and preparation, not chance. Controlling coyotes is not a one-time solution but requires time and patience. When behavior is properly understood and suitable trap placement is applied, effectiveness gradually improves over time. The key is to maintain monitoring and make adjustments when necessary, reducing damage and maintaining stability for the farming area in the long term.
China is entering a very unusual battle, one where the opponent is not human, but a wild army capable of turning entire fields into a battlefield overnight. Herds of wild boars, each weighing hundreds of kilograms, surge into rice paddies, tearing up the soil like living plows and destroying months of farmers' hard work. From Germany and Spain to Texas in the United States, the same scenario is unfolding as wild boar populations explode at a pace that leaves governments struggling to respond. A wide range of measures has been deployed, from electric fencing and steel traps to professional hunting teams and even helicopters. But time and again, the boars return, proving nearly impossible to control. Then a turning point begins to emerge. Instead of viewing wild boars solely as an agricultural disaster, China is taking a different approach, reframing the animal as a resource, an economic opportunity waiting to be tapped. Wild boars originally inhabited vast forests stretching across Eurasia and North Africa. But over time, their range has expanded at an alarming rate. Their reproductive ability functions almost like a non-stop natural machine. In the United States alone, the wild boar population has surpassed 6 million, spread across more than 35 states. In Texas alone, there are around 2.6 million, making it the largest concentration in North America. These numbers are not just statistics, they are visible in the destruction left behind. In Napa Valley, vineyards have been forced to install electric fences to stop boars from descending out of the hills. In Catalonia, farmers repeatedly wake up to find their corn and wheat fields devastated overnight. As the scale of damage continues to grow, many countries have been forced to launch large-scale control operations. In the United States, especially in Texas and Oklahoma, massive steel traps are set up along forest edges and farmland. Each trap can measure between 10 and 15 meters in diameter, large enough to capture an entire herd. Inside, corn or fermented feed is used as bait, combined with motion-sensing cameras and remote control systems for continuous monitoring. Once enough boars gather inside, a heavy metal gate weighing hundreds of kilograms is triggered to slam shut. In a single operation, these systems can capture anywhere from 20 to 30 animals. However, while many countries still treat wild boars strictly as pests to be eliminated, China has chosen a different path. In many mountainous regions in the south and southwest, wild boar meat has long been considered a high-value delicacy. Compared to industrial pork, it is leaner, firmer, and richer in flavor. As a result, its market price is often 2 to 3 times higher. After the shock of African swine fever in 2018, when hundreds of millions of pigs were culled and pork supply dropped sharply, many farms were forced to look for alternatives. From that moment, a new farming model began to take shape. In mountainous provinces such as Guangxi, Hunan, and Guizhou, large areas of hillside and forest are now enclosed with tall steel fencing. Each enclosure typically spans 20 to 50 hectares, giving the animals space to roam in an environment close to their natural habitat. Some large farms in Guangxi currently raise between 3,000 and 5,000 boars within these controlled forest systems. Constant movement across steep terrain, rooting for food, and self-foraging keep the animals highly active. This is what produces the leaner, firmer meat that continues to attract premium demand in specialty food markets. Gradually, an entirely new market has taken shape. Low feed costs, strong reproduction rates, and high selling prices have turned wild boar farming into an industry worth around $5 billion annually in China. But as this model expands, a larger question begins to surface. Can turning wild boars into a commercial farming industry truly solve the problem at its root? Or is it simply shifting the risk into another form, one that is quieter, but potentially even harder to control?
It pretty much comes ready to go almost right off.
No longer confined to the quiet depths of dense forests, red foxes are now appearing increasingly close to human living spaces. In the past, their primary food sources were field mice, small rabbits, and birds hiding in thick undergrowth. However, as forests become fragmented by farms, roads, and expanding residential areas, their natural habitat has gradually shrunk. As a result, these animals, once accustomed to the darkness of deep woods, have begun moving along forest edges and slowly approaching areas marked by human activity. As this situation repeats over time, simple deterrent methods, such as turning on lights, creating loud noises, or placing temporary barriers only remain effective for a short period. If food sources are still present, red foxes will not leave entirely, but instead become more cautious before quietly returning. Because of this, in many rural areas, people have shifted toward more direct control methods, such as setting traps along the paths these animals frequently eat at.
Excellent.
In larger areas, or where foxes have grown wary after multiple encounters with food sources, metal foothold traps are often the first choice. These traps are placed directly along familiar travel routes and combined with careful camouflage techniques to create a natural appearance. For instance, a tire may be positioned above the setup, with bait or strong scented attractants placed inside, leading the fox to believe it has found another routine feeding opportunity.
And you'd put it down in there, like so,
around the trap. As natural as it, and then maybe we can have something come up tonight.
The trap is typically set just before the bait location and then covered with a thin layer of soil, dry grass, or fallen leaves to blend into the surrounding environment. When the fox lowers its head to investigate and steps into the precisely calculated spot, the mechanism is immediately triggered, securing the animal with an anchor chain system. Modern traps are designed to hold firmly while minimizing the risk of injury, allowing handlers to inspect and manage the situation in accordance with safety guidelines.
Perfect catch on him. Completely had it. We're going to remake that set. We feel like we have more predators.
After an animal is captured, the surrounding area often shows clear signs of disturbance, such as displaced soil, scattered leaves, and circular patterns around the anchor point. This is a natural response, as the animal attempts to escape. Once the situation has been handled, the person managing the trap will level the ground again, check the entire mechanism, and replace the bait to continue controlling other individuals that may pass through Deadeye. In addition, in areas close to residential zones or where a higher level of safety is required, metal cage traps remain a common choice. These traps feature a sturdy, enclosed structure that safely contains the animal once it enters in search of food. They are often placed near trails, along fences, or in locations where cameras have previously recorded fox activity. Inside the trap, dried fish, meat scraps, or other strong-smelling bait are commonly used to trigger the animal's curiosity and feeding instincts. When the fox moves fully inside and activates the trigger mechanism, the cage door quickly shuts, keeping it contained and preventing escape. With their compact design and minimal impact on the surrounding landscape, cage traps are especially suitable for areas near homes, small gardens, or household-scale livestock operations. For this reason, they are often the preferred option when control is needed while maintaining a high level of safety.
That is a pretty little gray fox. I've never caught a gray fox like this one. Well, came in the trap. It's pretty good though. Our chicken house is not too far from here, so.
In many rural regions, trapping red foxes has become a familiar method in wildlife management as the distance between human activity and nature continues to narrow. When foxes repeatedly return to hunt, observing tracks, identifying movement paths, and placing traps in the right locations can help reduce damage and stabilize the area. If you find this content informative, feel free to leave a comment, and don't forget to follow the channel to explore more real-world stories about trapping methods, wildlife management, and life in rural environments.
At first, no one thought the small signs would lead to a silent crisis. Just a few disturbances on the ground, a few animals disappearing in the night. Everything was easy to overlook. But then, like an undercurrent slowly rising, the attacks began to appear more frequently. Pens were broken, overlapping tracks formed invisible paths, and after only a few nights, the damage was enough to shake any farm. As the pressure grew, familiar measures were quickly put in place. Fences were raised higher, nets were tightened, lights and alarm systems were installed everywhere. In the early days, everything seemed effective, but that sense of stability did not last long. The intruders adapted faster than expected, changing their approach, even using the very defenses to find new ways in. The confrontation gradually shifted from reaction to strategy. When passive solutions were no longer enough to maintain balance, a more proactive approach had to emerge. Direct control through traps, a method that always comes with controversy. For some, it is the final line of defense to protect their livelihood. For others, it is a boundary that must be carefully considered from an ethical perspective. But reality does not wait for perfect agreement. As the damage continues to rise, action becomes the only option. The first position is usually along a movement corridor, where tracks repeat almost every night. It could be the edge of a forest bordering farmland, or a small dirt path leading to a water source. Here, the trap is not placed randomly, but hidden exactly at the point the wolf is forced to step through. A seemingly unconscious step, yet it is the intersection of an entire chain of prior observations. Positions like these determine most of the plan's success. The second position is completely different, located near areas where prey has been attacked before. Not at the center, but at the outer edge, where the wolf often pauses to observe before approaching. This is a sensitive zone, requiring a high level of precision. The trap is set low, concealed, and nearly blends into the ground, while the scent is just enough to maintain curiosity without signaling danger. If the first position relies on movement habits, the second exploits hunting instincts, an even harder weakness to control. Safety is not just a principle, but a requirement. Operators approach from downwind, use gloves, and minimize any trace left behind. After the trap is triggered, inspections are carried out strictly according to protocol. This is not a single action, but a chain of disciplined steps, where any mistake can lead to unpredictable consequences. Over time, these efforts begin to show clear results. attacks gradually decrease, the pace of disruption slows, and areas once repeatedly invaded begin to stabilize. More importantly, control is no longer the responsibility of a few individuals, but becomes a coordinated system, where information is shared, experience is accumulated, and strategies are continuously refined. In many major cities around the world, such models have been implemented for years. Instead of waiting for problems to arise, long-term plans are built on surveys, monitoring, and community education. After all, wildlife is not the enemy. They are simply adapting to the changes created by humans. And within that adaptation, a larger question emerges. As the boundary between nature and human life continues to blur, what path will we choose to coexist? A fast but rigid solution, or a sustainable approach that requires time and deeper understanding? Perhaps the answer does not lie in the trap itself, but in how we perceive our role within the ecosystem. Because in the end, this space does not belong to humans alone. It is where two worlds are learning to exist side by side.
Losses exceeding $800,000 in a short period, enough to make any farmer hesitate. In just a few nights, entire flocks of poultry vanished, leaving behind cold, empty enclosures and chaotic traces scattered across the ground. No longer isolated incidents, this had become a series of coordinated attacks by wolves. As the damage continued to rise, many farms faced the risk of collapse. And a pressing question began to emerge: how would they fight back? At first, everything seemed like a minor nuisance. A few animals went missing, a few unfamiliar tracks appeared around the fences. But in a short time, the situation escalated rapidly. The predators began returning more frequently, following familiar paths, even identifying weaknesses in the protection systems. Some farms reported losing hundreds of animals in just 1 week. What was once a small issue had now turned into a full-blown crisis. Under mounting pressure, traditional defensive measures were immediately deployed. Fences were reinforced, protective nets were installed more densely, and warning devices were put into use. However, their effectiveness only lasted for a short time. The predators quickly adapted, changing their approach, even finding ways to bypass what seemed like the safest barriers. A true battle of wits began to take shape. When passive solutions were no longer enough, a more proactive approach was introduced: direct control through trapping. But this was far from an easy decision. The method has always been accompanied by intense debate over humaneness and safety. Some argue it is the only way to protect livelihoods, while others call for less controversial alternatives.
Even so, in practice, control still had to be carried out. Experienced individuals began with observation. They did not set traps immediately but instead monitored signs, travel routes, footprints, and access points to water sources. From there, movement patterns gradually became clear. Trap locations were carefully selected, often along the routes most frequently used. The setup process was carried out with high precision. Traps were treated to minimize foreign scent, then buried just beneath the surface to avoid detection. Anchoring stakes were driven deep to ensure stability. Bait was placed strategically, often combining strong scents with natural cues to increase attraction. Every detail was carefully calculated, as even a small mistake could cause the entire plan to fail. Throughout the process, safety remained the top priority. Operators had to approach from the right direction, use gloves, and minimize leaving human traces. After traps were activated, regular inspections were required according to regulations to avoid unnecessary risks. This was not just a control activity, but a process demanding discipline and high responsibility. Over time, these efforts began to show results. The number of attacks gradually declined, and losses became more manageable. Some reports indicated a significant reduction in farm intrusions. At the same time, the number of participants in legal control efforts increased, showing that this was no longer an isolated effort but a coordinated system. As environments continue to change and wildlife adapts more rapidly, every method will need to evolve. Ultimately, the choice is not only about effectiveness, but also about how humans balance protecting livelihoods and maintaining ecosystems. If you were faced with this situation, what would you choose? A forceful solution to eliminate the risk immediately, or a softer approach that requires more time? Share your perspective, because this is not just the story of a single farm, but an issue spreading across many regions. The night wind slips through weathered wooden fences, carrying with it a chill and the damp, earthy scent characteristic of the English countryside. Beneath the faint glow of the moon, the gardens behind seemingly quiet homes conceal an entirely different rhythm of life. When people have shut their doors and turned off their lights, a silent predator begins to emerge, the red fox. Without a sound, without warning, it glides along familiar paths as if every shadow, every gap between the bushes has long been committed to memory. At first, everything appears as scattered signs. A torn garbage bag, a few small footprints pressed into soft soil, or a fleeting rustle in the night. But over time, these clues gradually assemble into a clearer picture. The fox does not merely pass through, it returns. Repeating the same route, at the same time, with remarkable precision. What makes controlling foxes complex is not their number, but their memory and adaptability. A single successful food discovery can bring them back dozens of times afterward. A minor oversight, an unsecured chicken coop, a forgotten tray of food, can become an anchor point in their behavioral map. Foxes do not act on instinct alone, they behave as though they are testing the environment. If it is safe, they push further. If danger appears, they disappear, but not entirely, they simply change their approach. For this reason, trapping does not begin with setting devices, but with reading the landscape. Experienced individuals may spend several nights simply observing. They track footprints, identify entry and exit points, and note where the fox lingers longer than usual. Infrared cameras are discreetly positioned, not only to confirm presence, but to decode movement patterns, when the fox appears, which direction it takes, and most importantly, where it lets its guard down. Once behavioral patterns become clear, choosing the trap location becomes decisive. With foxes, more traps do not mean greater effectiveness. A poorly placed trap may be detected and avoided immediately. But if it is positioned along a path the fox has traveled dozens of times, a narrow trail by a fence, a gap beneath dense shrubs, it will almost disappear from the animal's perception. Not because it is perfectly hidden, but because it exists exactly where the fox believes is safe. However, the right location alone is not enough. Scent is often underestimated, yet it is the key to successful trapping. The smell of new metal, traces of human presence, or even disturbed soil can cause the animal to hesitate or change direction. Therefore, equipment is carefully treated before use, cleaned, aired outdoors, and coated with local soil to blend into the surroundings. The trap is not placed as a foreign object, but planted into the environment, as if it has always been there.
That's not gonna get caught. Force him down. Pretty dang hard.
Timing is equally critical. Foxes tend to operate on stable cycles, appearing at nearly fixed hours. Setting a trap too early may alter the environment before they arrive. Setting it too late may miss the crucial moment. When all factors are aligned, the correct route, the right placement, naturally camouflaged equipment, and precise timing, the moment happens within seconds, so quickly it is almost imperceptible. Catching a fox does not necessarily mean the problem is solved. For this animal, every encounter becomes a lesson. If one escapes, it will become more cautious, alter its route, and may even avoid the entire area for an extended period. Therefore, an effective strategy does not lie in repeated attempts, but in getting it right from the very beginning. As the boundary between humans and nature continues to shrink, such encounters become more common than ever. Yet rather than direct confrontation, the most effective approach remains understanding the opponent. With foxes, this is not a chase, but a battle of wits, where patience, observation, and precision determine the outcome. And in the stillness of suburban nights, where everything seems to be at rest, that game continues, quietly, slowly, yet always calculated. We are the Wild Hog Control Team in Oklahoma, working alongside Twin Eagle Ranch to stop a crisis that has been spreading day by day. More than 1,000 hectares of farmland have been torn apart after only a few nights. Young corn rows that had just started to sprout vanished from the ground, irrigation systems were destroyed, and thick mud stretched across the fields as if bulldozers had ripped through the land. For the farmers here, this is no longer just ordinary damage. If the hogs continue breeding and moving freely, entire harvests could completely collapse. But the most dangerous part is that wild hogs do not move randomly. They follow fixed routes, avoid light, stay away from populated areas, and only appear when everything falls silent. That is why this battle cannot be solved with a few gunshots or randomly placed traps. We have to rely on strategy, patience, and timing precise down to the second. That night, the Hawkeye camera system placed along the forest edge suddenly sent out a signal. 3 massive circular traps had already been set up days earlier. Inside them was a bait mixture of sweet corn, sand, and fermented cheese with a smell strong enough to pull entire sounders out from deep in the woods. The clock on the monitor read 1:57 a.m. On the screen, dark silhouettes slowly began appearing through the infrared glow. They moved carefully, sniffing the ground before stepping one by one into the trap zone without noticing anything unusual. I kept my hand on the remote trigger but did not act yet. If the trap closed too early, the entire sounder would scatter and never return to the same spot again. We waited through several agonizing seconds until the very last hog stepped fully inside. At that exact moment, I hit the button. The steel gate slammed shut with a thunderous crash in the middle of the night. In an instant, the silence completely shattered. Hogs weighing hundreds of pounds charged wildly into the steel frame, creating dry metallic impacts that echoed through the forest. The entire trap shook violently as the sounder desperately searched for a way out. It took several chaotic minutes before they finally grew exhausted and realized they were fully trapped. We immediately drove the Jeep Gladiator down the muddy dirt roads to check the site. When the headlights swept across the trap, the scene became shockingly clear. The entire sounder, including several massive boars weighing over 200 pounds, had been contained inside. But the situation was not over yet. After the forest edge had been disturbed, the remaining sounders quickly moved down toward the low ground near the livestock water tanks. We set up 2 additional octagonal traps directly along the paths they frequently used. Only a few hours later, the cameras started vibrating again from movement alerts. Another large sounder appeared in the darkness, more cautious than before, constantly checking every steel panel as if sensing the danger waiting ahead. I held my breath while watching the monitor. Not too early. Not too late. The moment the entire sounder moved deep enough inside, the trap slammed shut instantly. Steel rattled violently as the massive bodies crashed into one another in the darkness. Less than 2 hours later, the final trap also signaled a successful capture. In just one night, multiple large wild hog sounders had been completely controlled. The next morning, the muddy ground left behind by the sudden rainstorm actually became an advantage. Trailers and trucks were brought in to transport the heavy animals out of the area. Some were taken to professional processing facilities, while the rest were distributed to local families. When everything was finally over, the fields at last became quiet again. That was when we realized this battle had never been only about setting traps. It was a battle of strategy between humans and an animal that had learned to survive with incredible intelligence. One wrong move could destroy every effort we made. But when everything was calculated perfectly, we did not just capture wild hogs. We reclaimed the harvest for the farmers.